They say if you want to understand politics, you have to follow the money. In fact, that's exactly what we do at OpenSecrets. Today, we are going to learn more about how the state of Washington keeps an eye on the money influencing elections. I am David Myers, and this is the State of Disclosure. Today, I am speaking with J. Robert Leach, Chair of Washington's Public Disclosure Commission. Jay, thank you for joining me today.
Well, thank you for inviting me. I look forward to the opportunity to talk with you.
Also with us is Kim Bradford, Deputy Director of the Commission, in case we have any gaps to fill in during our conversation. So let's dive right in. Jay, to start things off, tell us about what your role entails as chair of the commission.
What you just said is a little garbled. My role, I think, is what you asked me to describe. I am the chair of a five-person commission that is charged with enforcing the campaign finance laws in the state of Washington. I also sit as a hearing officer in cases adjudicating complaints alleging violations of various provisions of our campaign finance laws.
And explain why that role is so important in the state of Washington.
Well, Washington, back in 1972, adopted a public policy by initiative that it was vital to the fair and open government to know basically what you said, where the money came from and where it's going. And the initiative that was adopted has a 11-point policy statement, and the one I think probably answers your question most directly is that the public's right to know of the financing of political campaigns and lobbying and the financial affairs of elected officials and candidates far outweighs any right that these matters remain secret and private. And that was an initiative that passed overwhelmingly in our state in 1972.
Have things evolved significantly since 72, or is the commission still operating in basically the same manner?
Pretty much the same matter. We have had to evolve a little bit based on technology changes. We've had to learn how to deal with fake news. We've had to deal with foreign contributions. And now we're dealing with public safety issues. But the basic framework has remained the same since 1972, and the policy goals have remained the same.
Right. So before coming to the commission, you were a judge on the state appeals court. Before that, you spent, I think it was 3 decades as a lawyer. How has that background informed your role in the commission?
Well, I think the role as an appellate judge certainly informs my ability to interpret the statute and how it should be applied. It also gives me some guidance in how to structure penalties if I find a violation. I think that my years of experience as a lawyer have given me the ability to both understand people and to be wary of what things sometimes look like at first impressions and to dig into the details and to also keep an open mind. Also, as a lawyer, you learn frequently that you're not right. There's a judge that explains why the other side is. And so I think that's a valuable lesson for anyone that serves in a place like I am right now on the Public Disclosure Commission.
And what drew you to that role?
Well, actually, I wasn't drawn so much as recruited. I had two of my colleagues on the Court of Appeals and a judge who I had tried cases in front of suggest my name to the Public Disclosure Commission and encouraged me to apply. I had been involved to some degree in politics as an attorney. I had represented candidates in campaigns. I had run for, the judicial position I held because we elect judges in Washington. And I've had a long time interest just in government. I was a history major in college and have, a significant concern in how things work out for all of us. We've got a contract that we all have participated in, I think, and at some intellectual level, and it's important to do what I can to see that that remains intact.
So let's talk a little bit about how the commission itself works and campaign finance in general in the state. What role does the commission play in ensuring transparency? I assume you're collecting reports and making them public somehow.
Yes, we have statutes that require, first of all, you have to register if you're going to run for public office. You have to file reports of contributions on a schedule dictated by statute. You have to file reports of expenditures on a schedule dictated by a statute. And we have all of those available online. We have over 11 million records available online for the public to view. If you want to see who's running for example, our state Supreme Court, we have an election coming up this fall. A number of candidates have already registered. You can simply plug in the Supreme Court this campaign year, and all of the candidates will come up. You can click on each one and see what reports they have filed now. Each of our candidates is required to file a financial disclosure report so you can see how they've made a living, where their money is, if they have money, if their spouse is involved in things that might be of interest to government. You can also see whether they've elected to raise money for their campaign. We have something called mini reporting. If you're not going to spend more than $7,000 on your campaign, you can elect that procedure. So you'll know going in, this candidate doesn't intend to try and raise very much money. And that's true for every public office you run for in the state of Washington, with one or two minor exceptions.
And are you also tracking independent expenditures in the state?
Are if you're going to if you're going to spend money to support a candidate, you also have to file reports with the state of Washington. You have to register with the state of Washington, and the same types of reports have to be filed, both fundraising and expenditures.
Great. So I know in Seattle they have the voucher program. I think it's called Democracy Vouchers.
Right.
Excuse me. And as I understand it, those are basically a way for voters to support candidates without actually using their own money. Is there any thought about expanding that more widely across the state rather than just a city
I'm aware
regulation?
of that, and that's kind of beyond the scope of what our commission does. That would be a legislative determination, but I'm not familiar with any effort to do that. And the voucher program in Seattle has not been without controversy. There have been some issues with that. So I don't know of any other jurisdiction in the state or the state as a whole looking to adopt that approach.
Even though it's a municipal issue, if you ever get involved in any of those controversies, or you
The only issue that comes to us is we have a threshold at which you have to disclose a donor's address, and the city of Seattle has addresses for all of the donors apparently, and so people will discover that even though all they've done is exercise their rights under the voucher program, their address is a public record in our files, and some people have concerns, primarily based on who they supported as a candidate, that their address is accessible, particularly in divisive times. Some people are fearful for their personal safety as a result.
uh, there's a general perception that money for us or like government can be a form of pay to play for people with a lot of money to spend or special interests. Are those issues that arise in your office? People come to you with complaints about perceived corruption, not necessarily actual corruption.
Um, Not corruption. We have people complaining about campaigns that have a large financial backing by individuals, but the campaigns have not been based, or the complaints have not been based on corruption. They've been other types of complaints relating to either the procedures used uh, or the disclosure of second tier contractors, that sort of thing.
Is that a pervasive issue that you have to deal with?
I wouldn't call it pervasive. It's been a prominent issue, and at least one of our decisions is currently in litigation. Um, but I wouldn't call it pervasive. It certainly attracted a lot of press attention that we have people with a lot of money able to fund initiatives that reflect their personal political perspective. But by the same token, some of those efforts have failed at the ballot box. So money hasn't actually turned the tide for a result in those situations. It's just given someone the opportunity to have their question decided by the public.
I imagine you or members of your team talk to officials in other states, at least periodically, if not often.
Um, our staff quite frequently does, and our general counsel participates in conferences around the country. I think he's a resource for other states for information. And My impression is that other states look to Washington. We've been kind of groundbreaking in this area and see how we've tried to deal with problems and see how our efforts have produced results.
Can you talk more about that? How has Washington been groundbreaking in ways that other states want to replicate your work?
Well, one example is we have in the age of social media, the grassroots efforts to influence political outcomes. And we have a new statute here that if you're participating in a grassroots effort, you have to register and you have to disclose the same kind of financial information as other people involved in the political process. I think that's probably the best example of something that we've done recently.
And are there lessons you've taken from other states?
Um, Yes, not too many, but we looked to California on a couple of issues. I'm trying to remember what the issue was, but it was several years ago, and I know we looked to see what California had done in that instance. We have been asked to look at what the FEC has done. Mostly we've looked at what they've done and decided that wasn't such a good idea rather than the other way around. So if you talk about negative examples, perhaps that's one.
Well, it doesn't help that these days the FEC can't do much since they don't even have a full quorum for the commission.
Well, and that's a concern for us as well to make sure that we maintain a quorum so that we can transact business.
Has that been an issue in the recent past?
It has. We're currently functioning with three commissioners, and we're supposed to have five. And for a variety of reasons, our governors, the last governor and the current governor, have had a lot of other things on their plates, and I think we probably haven't risen to the top as a result. I'm not pointing fingers at the governors. Both our governors have been working very hard on very complicated issues and natural disasters, but it is an issue for us.
I know with the FEC, there's requirements about uh, a partisan balance on the commissioners. Is that what's structured in Washington as well? Is there
We do
anything
have that
into it?
structure. We have a statute that does that, and people who are placed on the commission are identified either as associated with a major party or as being independent. And,
Okay.
and we have to have a balance.
So I want to look forward a little bit in the last few questions. Uh, what's top of mind as you get into the heart of the 2026 election cycle?
Uh, well, this next election cycle, we're trying to make sure we have educated all new candidates so they understand the requirements of filing and comply with that. We have outreach programs, we have tutorials online, and we're doing our best to make sure that we don't hear from somebody, gosh, I didn't know I needed to do that. Um, we also are trying to maintain transparency. There are efforts to try to protect rights to privacy, and that's a conflict, and we're doing what we can to make sure that the information remains as transparent as possible without endangering anyone's life.
Right. For those efforts to educate the candidates in the campaigns, do you find most campaigns are pretty receptive and do what's necessary to get up to speed on the rules and regulations?
I think once it's brought to their attention, that's true. But we have a number of small offices people run for, small districts, like a park district or something. Uh, they don't attract candidates anyway. They go out and try and recruit somebody. Somebody thinks they're doing a good deed for their community. Nobody bothers to tell them that there's campaign finance law that they have to follow. Uh, and sometimes they're a little resistant when they find out there's a whole lot more to running for office than they envisioned when they said, "Yeah, I'll serve on that park board." Uh, but by and large, I think the people that run for office in Washington make a sincere effort to comply. And when it's brought to their attention they haven't, they do what they can to bring themselves into compliance.
And if you could change one thing about how campaign finance is managed in Washington, or change the public perception and knowledge of something, what would it be?
That's an interesting question I haven't thought about. Um, I guess I would try to make it a little easier for the public to access the information that is currently available and to educate the public more about what they can find out about people they're voting for in terms of relevant information. Um, because I think that's the side where we probably don't function quite as well as maybe we could. People don't know enough about all of the things that should go into an informed decision.
What could you do from your end to make that easier for people?
Well, I think it's probably a public relations campaign and also to get local governments to inform their voters because we have two levels of voters pamphlets in the state of Washington. We have a statewide one, and then we have local voters pamphlets. I think, and that generally gets mailed to every postal customer. I think if more information was included there about how to find more information on the PDC website, excuse me, I think that might be helpful. Um, I'm kind of rambling off the top of my head a little bit here because this isn't something I've been thinking about.
All right. Well, I'm going to challenge you one more time along those lines. Looking way down the road, how do you envision the future of campaign financing and disclosure? Do you think the system stays the way it is, or do you think there's going to be major evolution that comes in the next 15 or 20 years?
Um, well, I think AI is one thing that may influence things down the line, and I don't know enough about it to fully predict what it's going to do, but I can tell you from personal searches that it can provide false information and hallucinate. And to the extent it hallucinates and then that gets replicated in social media, I think that's going to be a serious problem. I also am a little bit concerned about the U.S. Supreme Court and what it may do in a couple of cases pending before it about campaign financing. One of the things that potentially could happen is basically the Supreme Court could gut the state's ability to regulate the levels of campaign contributions. And I think that would be bad, but I'm a little bit fearful of that.
It's not the positive note I was hoping to end on, but it is something forward-looking for us all to think about.
Well,
Jay, thank you. Go ahead.
I'll just close with one thought for you. Remember what
Yeah.
Benjamin Franklin said about democracies.
I know his line about the republic, if you can keep it.
That's it.
Okay.
And
Yeah,
we've kept it for 250 years. So
great.
that gives me some optimism.
Excellent. Jay, thank you very much for speaking with me today. I really enjoyed learning how you manage things in Washington and the transparency and campaign disclosures. For those who want to learn more about how to follow the money, please visit us at opensecrets.org. Thanks and have a great day.
Thank you, and the same to you.